This is From the Desk with Jada Montemarano. Conversations with the innovators, leaders, and experts who are shaping the future of human resources through cutting-edge technology. Only on the Purple Acorn Network.
Welcome to From the Desk with Jada Montemarano, the podcast where we explore the world of HR. We will discuss trends, hot topics, and dive into the tools that help organizations improve how they attract, retain, and support their people, while also sharing how job seekers can land the perfect role during this tumultuous time. So grab your coffee and let's get into it. This is From the Desk with me, Jada Montemarano, where we bring the hottest HR news from the desk right to you. And in today's episode, our guest is someone who brings science, humor, and storytelling to the world of human behavior and leadership. Eric M. Bailey is the brain behind the best-selling book, The Cure for Stupidity, where he breaks down irrational behavior through the lens of brain science. Eric is the president of Bailey Strategic Innovation Group, one of the fastest rising consulting firms in the U.S., focusing on transforming the way we communicate. He's worked with organizations like Google, the U.S. Air Force, the city of St. Louis, and so much more. He also drops bite-sized wisdom through his YouTube series, The Walking Meeting, where he shares quick, powerful leadership lessons in under 2 minutes, and hopefully will be sharing that knowledge with us today. Thank you so much for joining us, Eric.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So we're going to get to that book, the book title, all of that in a little bit. But first, I want to start off with what got you into the world of HR and human behavior in general.
Well, I kind of Forrest Gumped my way into HR. I wasn't supposed to be an HR guy. I actually got my bachelor's degree in marketing and graphic design. And so I was doing that for a healthcare firm. And because I was an HR manager, they allowed me to go to their leadership development program. I had no staff, but I was, I guess, a leader because I was a manager. When I was in that program, the guy who ran it, he said, you've got something different. Why don't you come into my office once a month? We'll just talk. And he was doing coaching. I didn't know what coaching was at the time. And over the course of several months, he basically talked to me about organizational development. And I was like, this is exactly what I'm meant to do. And he would have occasionally give me homework assignments. One weekend, he said, okay, I want you to look up a role called Director of Organizational Development. I want you to write me a job description and come back on Monday. I'm like, I have no idea what this is. So I went home and Googled it and tried to figure it out and put something together. And he took it, looked at it, he's like, okay, this is pretty good. What should the salary be? I'm like, I don't know. So I go and research it on salary.com and I find, write something down. I bring it back the next day and he's like, okay, add these two duties, bump that salary by 5%. Do you want the job? And that was it. And I worked into organizational development. He was in charge of OD and HR and a small HR team. I helped out with HR. I was a good friend with the HR director, and we worked together on benefits. We worked on launching a new HRIS, which I had no idea what those acronyms stand for. But now I know, and I became an accidental HR guy, and I freaking love it. I love working with humans and the way that humans behave and interact with each other. And so I found my calling.
And then what brought you into starting Bailey Strategies Innovation Group, and what are you working on there? Because I know it's not just traditional HR.
No, it really isn't. What I found is that, HR has a lot to do with the law and legal stuff and protecting organizations. But what we really are focused on is the humans inside of the organization. And that's what really fascinated me the entire time. And when my wife and I started our company, we realized that folks have good intentions, they have good ideas, they don't quite know how to implement it because they don't realize how different and varied people can be. And so we decided to start this company to help folks with specifically that. So, there are some people that you love hanging out with and some people you really don't love hanging out with. And how can we make those difficult ones a little more palatable? How can you learn to understand where they're coming from? And that's what we get to do. So we work, it's a very, very basic human level, universal brain science principles. And we help folks kind of bridge those gaps and strengthen their organizations.
And you say the main way of doing that is through trust and honest communication, right? So how do you work with companies to facilitate all of this?
In a number of different ways. Anytime we work with an organization, we build something custom for them based on what they're going through. So usually, I'd say probably about 90% of companies, the baseline is communication. So we have to figure out, okay, what are you communicating? How are you communicating? And do you even understand what communication really is? And most people don't. Most people think if I said something or I wrote the email, I communicated. That's not it. Communication happens when message has been sent and message has been received. And that reception is actually more important because people are going to operate based on the message they heard, not what was said. And if there's a miscommunication, what was heard, maybe, off in left field, why did you do that? Because that's what I heard. And so getting people to realize that, oh, helping my folks hear the message right is the best way forward. And we work through a number of different exercises to help people realize that. Another thing that we do is we'll do like leadership development groups, we'll do executive trainings, we'll do team retreats, we'll do whole company conferences. And the really cool thing about that is that we have some really specific language we use in our training. And now the entire organization is using the same language in the same way. So when miscommunications happen, not if, but when they happen, we know how to process through them and work through them.
Do you think that miscommunication, like you said, is the biggest challenges that these companies and leaders have to kind of navigate that you help them with? Or are there others that kind of stand out that are the most common?
Yeah, there are others. So miscommunications are probably the foundation of it. But where trouble comes is in the judgment. So if, do you remember, it was back in 2017, there was this image of a blue and black or white and gold dress, right?
How can we forget that?
Right. And so that's an example of this. So two different people will look at the same image and perceive two different things. And the difference of perception, that's common. That's the miscommunication. Well, what happens is you say you see a blue and black dress, I see a white and gold dress, and obviously I'm right. And what happens, I start to judge you, judge your intelligence, judge your character. How could you possibly think it's blue and black? It's obviously white and gold. And that judgment, now we start kind of grinding on each other a little bit. And I start to judge you, you get defensive, and you start to judge me. And then the relationship starts to spiral. And that's the thing that causes a lot of the trouble in organizations. And you see people gather in pockets. You see silos because the people I like to hang out with understand me and they see the white and gold dress. The other people, they're just idiots. And that's what happens over and over again.
And is that something that you see an immediate change on when you're working with these companies? Because I feel like these aren't super tangible like numbers or data, right? It's all about feelings. So where do you see kind of turning points in these companies to kind of cure this, as we'll get
Yeah.
to?
One thing that we see is actually the easiest number to see is in employee satisfaction and retention. We see a lot of folks after they go through our systems, they want to stick around more because in every other job they've had, they communicate and people to understand. And now they've got an organization that's focused on communication. They're like, I've never felt so understood before. Yeah, my manager may be a jerk sometimes, but they're working to understand me. That's rare. It's very rare. And so we see people sticking around longer. We see a lot of boomerang employees. So people, I'm going to go chase more money. It actually was better over there and they actually come back. And that's a really high number we ask people to look for. And we see a lot of boomerang employees.
So it feels like you found that cure for stupidity in business, I think. So let's get to this book. Let's get to this name. Where did this name come from? And I'm assuming the word stupid and stupidity has some other meanings in there for you, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And, we talked earlier about the judgment. That's really a big problem. And, peek behind the curtain, spoiler alert, the cure for stupidity isn't about curing other people's stupidity. It's about changing the way we judge them when we misperceive things or we perceive things differently. And that's a really powerful shift because people will grab the book thinking, great, I can fix all of the people around me that are so stupid. And they go through it and they're learning all the different ways to see them differently, judge them differently. And like, oh, they're not actually stupid. That's just a quick judgment I came to. And when you judge people as stupid less, there is no stupidity around you. And so that's one thing. The reason I actually came up with it is, I wrote the book it was published in 2019. And so I started writing it 2018 or so. And we all know what was going on in our country politically. And there's a lot of this kind of division and bifurcation of our society. And I realized that the number one thing that people are jumping to is that judgment of intelligence. People who believe what I believe are smart and people who don't believe are clearly dumb. And it's like, it was shocking to me how many different areas of life I saw the same thing playing out. I saw, at Thanksgiving dinners, Christmas dinners. Oh, they're just dumb. online at Facebook, in the fast lane on the freeway. You see the same things happening. And so I started researching, how could I give people tools to essentially rid themselves of that pressure, that frustration. And when I went through it, I was like, oh my God, this is it. This could literally cure humanity, you know? And so I was thinking about how I can get this out. And so we started the company around there, and we're like, okay, let's do this in such a way that we can actually make a difference in the world, for people at work and for people at home.
I was going to say, so this book can be used for people in the workplace and then just every day to deal with Thanksgiving dinner.
Yes, absolutely. And the fun thing is, it's written about work because, I wrote it for people at work. It's actually written as a book club book. So, buy a bunch of copies and read it with people in a circle. It's great. But a lot of the examples in the book are me and my wife, like things that I learned and I went through, struggles that I've had, mistakes that I've made. And it's like, oh, this is clearly an example of this principle. And, a lot of it is stuff that, that I've had to struggle through. And so, yeah, it does apply at home. One of the things that I've seen a lot, probably over the last 20 years or so, is family members writing somebody off. And, I haven't talked to my sibling in so many years. Well, a lot of times we don't even remember what caused the riff. We went there, and now it's normalized. And that's one thing I want us to do as a society we need to stop normalizing division. We need to stop normalizing the separation and find out that there's beauty in the humanity around us.
It seems like there's a lot of that these days
Yes.
continuing. I feel like it hasn't changed much since when you wrote it in 2018. And I have a couple more questions about the book in detail, but in general, based off of what you said about that division. And I feel like we're seeing that in our country, like I said, still today. But you also wrote this book pre-COVID. So while things are still the same, there's probably some differences. Do we need a second edition, a new version, or do you think those rules kind of still apply?
So the base rules still do apply, but there is a lot of differences, and there may be another book coming in the future. I don't want to be too
You
confident
heard
on
it
it,
here
but
first.
yes. Um, but one thing that we've seen, because that's kind of been illuminated through COVID, is loneliness. And there was a study that was done in 2020, late 2020, that we as a U.S. workforce is the most lonely it's ever been. So it's like something like 3 out of 5 U.S. working adults say that they're lonely at work. And what that means is that you don't have someone that knows you well, which is like knows your biggest worries and your biggest goals. If you don't have someone at work that knows those things, like it feels like you're just going to work on an island. You're polite to a lot of people. A lot of people are polite to you, and then you go home. And the problem with that is we are social creatures. We are designed to work together. And so one of the things that if I were to rewrite this book, I would add in a lot of elements of this idea of connection. We were talking about communication a lot, but connection is the thing. There's a lot of research that shows that connection, human connection, or one-to-one or one-to-few connection, actually overcomes burnout, overcomes depression, overcomes anxiety. All those things are kind of resolved with deep and real connection. And there are some things that we can do using brain science to easily connect with people. But unfortunately, we're really good at isolating and not really good at connecting.
And speaking of that brain science, you look into a lot of irrational behavior in the book. So can you explain just first what irrational behavior is and why is it so common among everyone?
Yeah. And again, this idea of irrational behavior comes from, me. I am a person. You are a person. I think that all of my thoughts, behaviors, actions, and reactions are rational. And if you think that they're not, clearly you are irrational. Right. And you see me behaving in a way that's like, that's not the right way to do. So you think I'm irrational, and I'm like, what is going on? And we just jump to these judgments all the time. But so, for example, great example, I was coaching with this guy, manager of an organization, an arts organization. And he said, I've got this employee and she is terrible. And I was like, what do you mean terrible? And he said, well, she always shows up late to work. I'm like, okay, all right. I've seen this before. Let's talk it through. And I was like, well, what time does she show up? He said she shows up every day at 10 o'clock. I'm like, okay, well, what time is she supposed to arrive? And he said she's supposed to show up between 8 and 8:30. I'm like, okay. how did you communicate to her that she should show up between 8 and 8:30? He said, oh, I told her, and just like I tell everyone, you need to show up at a reasonable time. Those are the words he used. And I was like, okay, well, is it possible that a reasonable time means 8 to 8:30 to you, but it doesn't mean the same thing to her? And he's like, no, everyone knows that's what it means. It's like, okay. Because to him, she was being irrational. That was irrational behavior. And so I said, okay, let's dive in. Let's try to figure this out. And so I had a conversation with the woman, and I found out that her previous job was working at a bar. She's a bartender. And so I'm like, wait a minute. So for a bartender showing up at a reasonable time, 10 o'clock that's early. Like, she's showing up early. And I said to him, I was like, did you realize that she shows every day at the same time? Like, it's not that she's showing up like 10, 10:30, 10:40, 9:40, like, no, every day at 10. That means she thinks she's doing something perfectly rational. And these kinds of things are happening all over the place, where people feel that I was perfectly clear. Everyone knows this. It's common sense. And that idea, the common sense idea, is so bizarre, because it means what? It's sense is intelligence. Common, everyone has it, but you, right? And it's like, we're judging people's intelligence all the time. So it's surprisingly pervasive. And when we start to understand, it's like, oh, we can actually gain a lot of freedom from this if we understand the brain science of what's causing it.
And are there main, like, 5 key things that any leader should be focusing on? Like you mentioned in this example, just saying reasonable time, and everyone can have a difference to that. So are there like some actionable items that you can share with our viewers of things they could take away of, like, okay, if I'm in these situations, these are some of the things that I have to follow. Like, be clear with your expectations. I learned from that tip.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a interesting difference that I created. So expectations. So I expect people to arrive at 8:30 or 8 and 8:30. But the words I said was arrive at a reasonable time. And because I haven't actually communicated my expectation, I don't have an expectation. I have a desire. And there's a difference between a desire and an expectation, because an expectation is well communicated and understood. And so you see, you have an expectation, you say, okay, I expect you to arrive between 8 and 8:30. And then she says, okay. And then I confirm. So what time should you arrive? Between 8 and 8:30. And so now we have a well-communicated expectation. It's not just a wish or desire or a hope. My friend Nicole Lance, she says all the time, hope is not a strategy. Right? You have to be very clear. Another one is be aware of how much we judge other people. Whether it's our employees, our coworkers, up and down, we're judging people all the time. And so monitor that. You're not going to stop judging people, but just monitor. This is a judgment of them. And try to be curious. What has caused them to go in that direction? Another thing that's really, really powerful for a lot of leaders is understanding that as many people as you need to communicate to, there are likely that many ways you need to communicate. Also, depending on how they came into work that day, if they had a flat tire, if their kids were yelling at them, if they're working from home and their internet goes out, they're going to receive communications differently than they would have the day before. Communication is very, very hard. And so if you want to work on any one skill as a leader, work on communication. Like, always try to perfect that, because it is constantly in flux.
And that's a perfect kind of full circle moment, going back to how we started the show today, talking about trusting communication being so important in the workplace. And I always love to end our segment with a key kind of tip for job seekers out there. We know we are in a difficult time in the job market. Jobs are hard to come by, but if people are able to land those interviews and get into those spaces, what do you recommend job seekers look out for with companies to say, hey, they do have communication, they do have good trust, this should be a company I can work for?
Yeah, one of the best things that I've seen is asking good questions. So if you're a job seeker trying to figure out if you're working for a good organization, ask the people on the panel or the interviewer, what is the hardest thing that people go through in their first year? And they're like, whoa, I've never heard a question like that. And usually if they're honest and they say something like, well, we actually see that a lot of people have a hard time with this policy, or see a lot of people have a hard time with communication. that may be your red flag. That is not the right place. Or if they say something really, really vulnerable, we see that a lot of new people coming in, they're not used to how hard we all work. It's just, we work pretty hard here. And they say something really vulnerable like that. That's a great indication that they're going to be honest with you throughout your tenure there. And so whenever I ask questions like that, if I'm in the job seekers standpoint or coaching people on how to get a job, look for those moments of authenticity that they will give you. If it feels like they're trying to sell you on something, they're probably trying to sell you on something because they have really high turnover. And I've seen people like that. It's like, okay, what is your average 1 year turnover, 90-day turnover? Those are hard questions that people aren't used to asking, but it gives you good information. Another thing, and this is something I always try to coach folks, is look people in the eye. If you are not good at looking people in the eye, practice looking people in the eye. And one tool that I use is I just pick one eyeball, left or right, and just look at that one. And you're not shifty, you're not looking, but make eye contact, because when we make eye contact with another human being, our brains release oxytocin. And oxytocin is the bond forming chemical. So the more eye contact you can make, the more of a bond the interviewers will feel with you, and you're more likely to get the job.
That's a great tip. My grandpa always said a firm handshake as well. So eye
Yeah.
contact and a firm handshake.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Eric. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you, Jada. This was a lot of fun.
Awesome. And thank you all so much for joining us today. As always, you'll catch us every Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific time. If you're hungry for other Purple Acorn shows, head to purpleacornnetwork.com or Purple Acorn on LinkedIn. I'll see you next time on From the Desk with me, Jada Montemarano.